Greetings, shippers. Welcome back, and it's time for our fourth episode of Fanversations. Today, we're joined by the lovely Sticky, aka Stacy, who is a really big Sterek fan. She's so involved in the community and all of the happenings. And after my Sterek video, we were put in touch, and we just couldn't stop chatting, and so you'll see. Stacy also has a podcast where she discusses all kinds of fanficky things, usually around Sterek. We're talking works in progress, sometimes it's not safe for work. It's a very good time. She also has her own Tumblr, and you can of course follow her on Twitter, and I'm going to have all those links down below. So if you watch this and you enjoy what you see, don't be afraid to hit up all those links or check out her Patreon. Now, if you're interested in hearing a really big Sterek fan's opinions about Sterek from the inside, stay tuned. It's quite fascinating. Let's get started, and I'll see you guys at the end. Greetings, shippers. It's Sasha here from Shipper's Guide to the Galaxy with...
Dicky Keys, Stacy.
So when I announced, I did a promo video about the fact that I was going to be doing this series, talking to a variety of people and everything. And when I mentioned that we were going to talk about Sterek, people got afraid. The response, there was some fear. They were like, I don't want to talk about that. I'm afraid. So I figured this would be a good chance to talk about it and show it's okay. They don't need to be afraid. You can have a conversation about Sterek, and it's okay. So you actually have the Tumblr where you do all kinds of podcasts and stuff about Sterek and a variety of different things. So why don't you talk about that a little bit and let people know what it's all about?
Certainly. First of all, thank you so much for having me on. Our mutual follower, Jess, who's Little Frog, she was like, ooh, she's looking, she might do a part 2, and she's looking for someone, to come on. I'm going to get y'all 2 together. So I was like, oh, this is. And first, I really did appreciate the video, and I love the idea of being able to get kind of the shipper point of view. I have been shipping Sterek for about 3 years now. I think I joined the fandom in about 2014, 2013, something like that, and did not originally start as a Sterek shipper, but I had the podcast where we were doing pithy recaps of the different shows. And I know it was definitely 2014 because I came in after BWT Gate. I saw more and more that my followers were, I have the podcast and then I have a Tumblr where people can send me anonymous asks. Mm-hmm. And I found more and more in the asks, people are like, what's up with the Sterek thing? Blah, blah, blah. Have you heard about Sterek? Da, 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 da. And at first I was just like, leave them Sterek alone. I don't know them. They're crazy. So, and then I started getting more into the fandom, more into fan fiction and other fan works. And I was just like, Sterek is amazing. What have I done the entire time? And so then, of course, I'm one of those people where I used to work a job, a night audit. I used to do overnights at a hotel. And so once people checked in, really after that, you would have about 4 or 5 hours of just nothing until you had to run the backup. And so I was one of those people who are like, all right, let's click links and let's really dig and see what's going on. And so I had this very surface view of fandom that was like, Stereks are evil and they're loud and blah, 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 and brash. And then I had actual Stereks that were lovely. And, the fan art and the fandom and the fanfic and all that stuff. So I was like, what's missing here? You know, what's in this space that, these don't match up? And so I started doing a lot of kind of research, and I was just like, oh, come on. And so, I'm Beacon Hills After Dark, BHAD podcast on Tumblr, Twitter, Instagram, all the above, SoundCloud, although we're going to be moving, I think, permanently to Spreaker now. But we have a lot of podcasts where we just talk about the fandom, about the show. And we're going to do Teen Wolf's Messiest Moments part 3. So that should be a lot of fun. But yeah, that's kind of how I got my start and kind of where I am now with it. Is I write fanfic, I read fanfic, I participate in a lot of the events, specifically Sterek, although we love Coco, we love, the mess that is Ian Bowen. And so it's a lot of fun. We have a lot of people with a lot of different views, but we kind of keep track of what's going on with the cast.
So when I did the Sterek video, it was very much meant to be an overview, and Teen Wolf is one of the more passionate fandoms, definitely. Yeah. Because
Yes.
whenever I do a video, you can kind of gauge how passionate the fandom is based on how they respond to it. So for the most part, most people were cool with it being an overview, and they requested, like, oh, can we hear more about this, more about that, maybe some moments in fandom history, which absolutely, because with Sterek, so much happened. It's just a minefield of so many things. But I also
Yes.
found that there were some people whose expectation was just instantly that it should delve really deep. So
Right.
so I guess one of the questions I have, because you were talking about that divide, between the kind of mainstream look at Sterek, it's, oh my God, like, keep away from it, it's a bit much, to the actual fandom experience. But do you find that there's maybe a bit of overlap? Like, having been in the fandom for so long now and being a proud supporter of Sterek and everything, do you find that there's any credence to some of the stuff that people say, that sometimes Sterek can be a bit overpowering because it is the majority ship to the other ships within the fandom?
I think that it can be overwhelming, specifically given that it is not quote unquote a canon ship.
Mm.
And as we kind of talk, we talk a lot about Teen Wolf within the fandom and their ability to lean into pettiness. There's several examples even outside of Sterek, but just of never really being able to say I'm wrong, but saying rather, oh, I meant to do that the entire time. Leaning hard into it. And even we were talking about the kiss between Styles and Lydia, the panic attack kiss.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as that happens, on the surface, you're like, oh, that was very romantic and was sweet, and she was helping him out, and da, da, da. But then you take that one further step, and you're like, you don't kiss people that have panic attacks. What are you talking about?
That's kind of taking advantage, and it's not a good time.
Yeah, like, read the room, people. Like, here. And it's like, I understood where they were coming from, but I feel like they just instantly went on the defensive instead of being like, oh man, we didn't even realize this. This is what we were trying to do, but this is kind of how it came off. And so then 3 seasons later, you have the penultimate moment of Lydia realizing her love when he kissed me, going right back to this. We're like, what are you doing? I started Teen Wolf as a very casual viewer. I was one of those people that said, I think we binge watched it even. So it was just one after the other, and I didn't really take it in. It was like cute little werewolf boys. I was a big Colton Haynes fan. And I'd actually known him from his Showtime show before the Gates. I was like, I'm not about the Gates. But yeah, show on Showtime. And I'm completely blanking on the thing, but it was one where his cakes were all out. Like, but, and then I knew Tyler Posey. And so I was just like, okay, what's this show about, And then, of course, my whole thing, I didn't care about werewolves. I didn't care about any of that. I was like, here is a teenage boy that is going through some things. Let's see what happens to him. And so I was very, very, very surface on it. And it wasn't until I got really more involved in the fandom that I was like, oh, kind of going back and re-watching those episodes and being like, I totally see where they're coming from with this. One of my favorite stories ever, a friend of mine had taken her mom to go see The Sixth Sense.
Okay.
And when it came out, it was a very big deal. So they were in the theater and she was sitting with her mom, Bruce Willis gets shot at the beginning and da-da-da-da. And go through the movie, and they have the twist, and she's kind of watching her mom, and her mom's just like, just kind of enjoying it, and like, okay. And so as they were leaving, they were like, Mom, did you enjoy the movie? And she was like, yeah, it was nice, it was a good movie. And she was like, well, what about the twist that he was dead the whole time? She said, well, of course he was dead. He got shot in the first scene. And I was like, ow. But I was that kind of casual viewer where it was like, I thought that Derek was mean to Styles. I didn't like him, and I did not think he was cute, and I was just like, okay, and went about my business. And then I found myself arguing with someone about it a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, nobody who's mad at each other looks at each other's mouths that much and licks their lips. And then I was like, but I know that that's something I would have completely missed the first time. So when you kind of take that those, you have two separate viewers with that. The person that kind of understands the idea of fandom, and so automatically from the jump kind of knows what to look for and knows what to look in the scene so that they can take those elements and then share them with the fandom. And then the kind of person that's like, I'm going to put this on in the background and, you know, very casual.
I think there's also the other type too, who even the ones who are in the fandom and see the cues, they still just don't end up gravitating to those two, for maybe they never end up liking Derek or Styles, or just
Right.
are drawn to other elements. But I think like Styles and Derek have so many cues that I can completely understand how they became the dominant ship within the fandom. And I think part of what helped them become so dominant was the way it was so mishandled in the mainstream when it came to PR and all of that horribleness.
Teen Wolf was at a very specific section where one of my first fandoms, which this is before I even knew what fandom was, and it wasn't until later that I was like, that was a fandom. You know, like, oh my God. But was Lost. And Lost, and then there was another show that came after it, was one of the first ones to really kind of use social media within their marketing. And so you kind of had this weird section of time where canon could happen off screen.
Yes.
And so when you're dealing with purists, they're like, no, it's not canon unless it is on the screen. And then you're dealing with the other ones who are like, oh no, he said it on Twitter, he said this, he said that. And, you know, of course it's canon, it's real, this is how it works. And so I think Teen Wolf hit that intersection head on. And so they did, when we talk about expectations of like, oh, well, why would you think there would ever be Sterek? It was never on the show. But if you look outside the show, Sterek was everywhere. There are people that started watching Teen Wolf because of Sterek.
Yes,
and then they're
100%. People who came into it having seen fan art or read fics or just seen even GIFs or stuff, and they thought that they were a couple just based on what they had seen, and they start watching the show and it's not that at all.
And so then you have the kind of the contingency that is very into the show canon style and very into the mythology of the show. So they want to see a supernatural show versus the MTV crowd who's like, Taylor Posey's so cute and Colton Haynes is so cute, and Derek and Styles, that kind of thing. And they just clash head on because you have the show that won't pick a side. I guess that's kind of one way to look at it.
And it's still so nebulous, even to this day, about how people are supposed to interpret what is said on social media or outside of the actual on-screen canon, and when you're supposed to take it seriously and when you're not supposed to take it seriously.
Yes, and the lack of consistency is infuriating, you know, but that's kind of what leads to a lot of these issues.
Definitely. Where you're seeing it a lot now, it's very similar to Teen Wolf, is the Voltron fandom. Because you'll have, you know, executive producers say that they're this age and that this romance has potential. And it's like voice cast says that this like romance has potential. And so then you have all these people, I see it in my comments all the time, like, oh, but her voice actress said that they could be together. And then someone else would be like, no, but the creative staff said. And I'm like, oh dear, it's starting all over again. It's messy.
And when you can see it starting, I don't mess with Voltron fandom. I'm like, I can't do it.
Not again.
Yeah, it's the weird engagement. Will Wallace is a writer for Teen Wolf, and he would take to Twitter answering questions. And I'm like, you have to stress that these are your headcanons. This isn't actually what's canon on screen, because what people do, especially in a volatile fandom like Teen Wolf, is they start listing those out for fighting points.
Yeah, they start taking it and like, oh, he's on the creative staff, so of course what he says is true. But I think also because, as you mentioned, with that intersection of when it happened, it was very much the beginning and people didn't understand how to use it, or I think even have a full comprehension of how seriously some fans take things.
It.
Yeah, because I think for a lot of people, they just see the art and assume that everybody's just having a good time and it's not that serious, and so they feel that they can play with it. And to some extent, they can play, but I do feel it's important to say that you are playing if that's what you're doing.
One of the biggest things in fandom is, especially with Teen Wolf, we talk a lot about LGBTQIA inclusion and representation.
Mm-hmm.
And so originally from the very first episode, we had a canon gay character, which was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And not only gay, but openly gay, you know, and we talk a lot about this on the podcast where they said, oh, you're going to have a world free of homophobia. What the fandom took that to mean is that we are going to have a world without boxes, where, you know, people are more fluid. It's not about
kind of like Yuri on Ice, where that's just how the world is, and it's completely fine, and everybody can be how they want to be, and there's not going to be
what ends up happening is, oh, well, Derek and Styles can't be together because they're not gay.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, oh, hello, Pandora's box. Let's open this up and see what is going on. And it's like there's so many arguments to and from, and, you know, to and for, and that kind of thing. But when you think about it on a very base level, you have the protagonist, you have their best friend, and then you have the bad boy.
Mm-hmm.
In every single show ever, if this best friend is a girl, she's getting with that bad boy. It's just what's going to happen.
It's the trope, yeah.
Trope. It's 100% the trope. And there is a fan theory that between seasons 2 and 3A, that Styles actually helped Derek look for Boyd and Erica in the woods when they were missing. And some of the peers hate this theory because they're like, oh, because a lot of Stereks are like, oh, that's when they began their relationship, and that's when they fell in love, you know, so all this other stuff. But it's like, in any other fandom, that makes total sense. But because it's two guys, it doesn't. And not only because it's two guys, it doesn't, but because it's two guys who are main cast. So then we get into the situation where we're like, okay, we have this canon gay character, yay. And because Teen Wolf is a show without homophobia or without limits, is what the fandom took it to mean, then Derek and Styles, oh, that'll be fine. Yeah, we're going to get Derek and Styles, you know. And so, you know, they're taking it to Twitter, and you have Greg Berlanti being like, if you don't do it, I will, which, let's talk about Riverdale later. And you have Jeff Davis like, I could be persuaded. And you have, you know, all these people jumping in, and celebrities, and the backlot with the whole Slash Madness, and people have this fear for Sterek. What really ended up taking me out when I was doing my initial kind of dig was Cookies for Sterek. And when I heard about it on the one side, I heard they tried to bribe the show and tried to get them to do Sterek by sending them cookies, you know, and I was just like, okay. But then I looked on the other side, and it was just like, there was a conversation where some girl was like, if you do Sterek, I would give you my firstborn. Jeff was like, I don't know about babies, but I like cookies. And she was like, oh, okay, what kind? You know, like a fun little thing. So they put together these Cookies for Sterek, and it had like different pictures and sayings, all this stuff. And they just sent them, no strings attached, no expectations. Just, this is fun. You know, we are having fun.
Yeah, we're participating.
It's just so interesting to see something like that get kind of malshapen and misshapen once your end game changes. I don't know if they ever plan to do Sterek. I have loads of theories that I could talk to you hours have made about why Sterek specifically didn't happen. But
it's very unclear. I guess one of the questions that I have that kind of comes off of that is, do you think that maybe all of the behind the scenes people just got too engaged in it and didn't either think about what it would take to really follow through, or how they would follow through, or if they even could follow through with doing that kind of relationship on an MTV teeny bop show?
I do know that we actually had access to a lot of the behind the scenes people, and they got really involved with the fandom, which just makes it even more and more just crazy how big Sterek got, and really how influential. I feel like you're dealing with the show level. So you're dealing with, okay, we have all this actor turnover. We have these storylines that are incomplete. We need something to we have to keep moving forward. We don't really have time. And then you have the powers that be, MTV advertisers, that kind of thing. MTV changed hands like 3 times during the run of Teen Wolf, and really just recently got a new president, which is the only reason that they got this 6th season. And when we talk about Comic-Con and Hall H and, just all that stuff, it's because of this most recent president. And ultimately, it just comes to a lot of bad timing and a lot of inability to course correct. And so, in my opinion, but where I kind of jump into it is the way that they interact and deal with the fans, and not really understanding who their fan base is. They had made a very significant showing at the Queer Horror Panel, like in 2009. And it was a very big deal because, you have this MTV show that is representing supernatural, but then also LGBT kind of elements and that kind of thing to it. And so they supported the Queer Horror Panel, and they did a lot of marketing for them. And then the second year, they didn't go. And it was like a very big, like...
Why? Yeah, why?
But that's kind of when the transition happened, where you're like, okay, this is a popular show now. So we're not necessarily writing our hopes and dreams. We're writing to advertisers and to the powers that be, into staying on the air and getting an ad share and going to upfronts, and that kind of thing. And so I think that those things, when they clash big. There are a million conspiracies, and that's the thing, is that they could all be right, but they could all be wrong too. So yeah, it ultimately, it just comes down to the way that they interacted with the fandom.
So what do you think, like, having seen the debacle that was all of the interactions and how it got a bit too nebulous with all of the connections, and do you think that people had too much access to them? Like, do you think that maybe they should have kept that level of distance?
Yes. However, it's one of those things where it's a very, it's so hard to tell. I went to my first convention in 2014, and I went by myself. I didn't really know anyone. And there is an atmosphere to conventions,
yes,
where you have the celebrities right there, and you kind of meet them and you interact with them, and then you internalize that experience. What people fail to understand is that that was a drop in that person's timeline. And so where, we might get a very real kind of like connection, it might not necessarily be so on their end. And same with the powers that be, where it's like, okay, I got me and one of the showrunners, we DM back and forth all the time, and I'm in the know. And it's like, you're in the know from your end because you knew nothing. A little bit, but you are one of many that this person is dealing with, trying to understand how to promote the show and that kind of thing. So it's this it's building a connection without setting the expectations of saying, we're not friends, we're connection.
Yeah.
And that's a very tough thing to deal with. I've known people on both of those sides who got just bit, and they were like, nope, never again.
Yeah.
And I know people that still try to milk that. A big part of that was, we talked about, I don't know if we talked about this last time, but the Fandom U Awards.
Yes.
And
yeah.
The Sterek campaign happened and ended actually before my time in fandom, but I kind of read back and knew a little bit. And then the Fandom U Awards happened in 2014, so that's when I knew. So I came in at a very strange time. It was like after Posygate and, BWT, Bizarre Weird Twisted, but before, like, it just really started to melt down. Sterek campaign had a lot of efforts, and really it was just a fandom effort. It was Sterek's helping, Sterek's in it. A lot of people got upset, and they're like, well, why does it have to be Sterek? Why can't it be everybody? But they're like, well, we're Sterek's, and anyone can participate, and a whole lot of people did. And we talked about this, but those numbers are insane.
Yeah.
had a girl, she accidentally deleted her Tumblr account, and she's like, yeah, and there go my 40,000 followers. And I'm like, what? How do you get that? But then I just looked at my followers I have a page called Sticky Love Sterek. All I do is reblog Sterek. I don't any meta, there's no wank. It's just me reblogging Sterek. I have 4,000 members on that page. And I'm just like, I wish you guys would listen to the podcast.
Yeah, come over.
It's just, it's very interesting how, big it gets. But, so yeah, they put together this effort and they adopted a wolf at a wolf sanctuary. And I could be a little bit fuzzy on those details, but the gist was specifically on behalf of Teen Wolf, this is what, we're saving this wolf and da-da-da-da. And so during the Fandom Awards, they won the award. Sterek campaign did. Well, Tyler Posey, God bless him, accepted the award and then handed it off to someone in the audience. Say, oh, this award is for everybody. But the person he handed it off to, that's another conspiracy theory that we're just like, was that a But a lot of people were hurt by that. And so you were already kind of dealing with issues from Bizarre, Weird, Twisted. And because that's really when the tide started to turn against Sterek. And so you're dealing with that. And then you're also dealing with just fandom Tumblr drama. And then that kind of happens. And it was just like a slap in the face. The problem is that Stereks are extremely stubborn. We're extremely stubborn. We're extremely hard-headed. So no one was going to take that line down. And then, of course, it just blew up. But to the point was afterwards, they had been, it was kind of like, oh, don't worry about it. It was just a mistake. We'll get you a new award, a new thing, And to this day, that has never happened. But the fact that I know that conversation took place, and that I know other conversations behind that took place, where it's just like that was with someone who was directly involved with the show, directly involved with their PR. I find that I think they tried to control certain aspects of the marketing, but ended up losing control when it came to maintaining that relationship.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Because it's too much. It's too big. It's too big to possibly control because there are too many elements and people are so passionate about it. But I guess...
Well, it's too big to do in the shadows.
Yeah.
It's too big to do via DM, man.
For sure.
But if you take it and you make it an actual movement, my whole thing is from the get, just say, Stereks, you guys are awesome. We love your fan works. We love the things you do in fiction. That's not the direction we're going on in the show.
Do you think that would have been enough, though? Or do you think there still would have been people who would still have campaigned just as hard?
When that would have been enough is after the first time of... I think that Stereks, we had our expectations up here. And then there was another event, and I have written it down, but something just dropped it down a peg where you were like, okay, so, like now I know what it kind of feels like to be kind of dropped off that pedestal a little bit. I would have taken that at that point. That'd be more like a 2014. We're talking about, or 2015, season 4. I think a good season 4 thing would be like, we love you guys. It's not going to happen in canon on the show, because then you're talking about when Hecklin is leaving. That's his last season. And so then you can kind of be like, oh, this wasn't the direction of the show, and Hecklin decided to go and do other things. So Sterek isn't going to become canon, but it'll always be canon in your heart. Love it. But I think before then, the expectation would have been really huge, because we're talking about, are you familiar with On a Boat?
Oh, yes, of course, yes.
In hindsight, that's a hindsight is 2020, because at the time, Sterek, that was again before my time, but Sterek's got their lives, and that was just everything. It meant everything to them.
That's why I had to use it so much in my video, because I was like, yep, On a Boat.
What happened? That happened. You know? And for something that big to happen, but you still don't follow it up with, we're having fun.
Yeah.
Because they even had a thing where they said, if we get enough votes, and that was the other thing, if we get enough votes in XYZ poll, then we'll release a Sterek blooper trailer. And they did. And so it's just like, okay, you're saying if we do this, if we do this, if we do this, and you're delivering, but we can't get Sterek on the show.
It's like, it's very baity. Like there are times when people say like, oh, the show is baiting, and it's kind of, you're not sure. But with this, it's very much baiting.
It's so baiting. And the problem is that once you get very kind of paranoid, very conspiracy theory, like very like, you know, red string on the wall connected to this. And so suddenly you have a scene in 3B where Derek is the king on Styles' board. And you're just like, what does that mean? Is that Sterek? Does Derek know he's the king? Is he Styles' king? Or like, oh, it was just random. We just needed to find a way to get Derek to the loft. And I was like, no. So then you're like, ooh, there's some undercover Sterek on the writing scene, and they're just slipping in little bits of Sterek. And then you're just like, oh, you know, it just gets so crazy. But it contributes to fandom kind of going bonkers. And so one of the things that we talked about is, did fandom go too far?
Yes.
And are there areas where we went too far? And my whole thing is only in so much that we kind of allowed the show shenanigans to paint how we treated each other outside of those shenanigans, and still very much dealing with that to this day.
I think that's a very good point, because when I think that's why the person I was talking to was afraid, because they were like, you know, I'm not a Sterek shipper, and I've always had such a hard time because I don't ship Sterek in the fandom, and everybody's always trying to convince me, and I just don't want to.
But I find that I was actually just having an argument with this person, and I said, at the end of the day, after I get done, you know, yelling at Scott Stans, and, you know, cursing Jeff Davis and just all this other stuff, I can go to my Tumblr and read my asks, and I can go to AO3 and pick out some fanfics, and I can go and look at, you know, different fan art, and I have a Sterek chat that I'm in, you know, go and talk with other Stereks and that kind of thing. On the opposite side, you have so many. Sterek is big enough where you can do that. You can find the pockets. There are people who ship Sterek with a huge crowd of other people, and they have no clue about the drama. They have no idea. They are just in their blissful, the eternal love of Styles Stilinski and Derek Hale, and that's where I am, you know. And then you have the people that are like, drama, you know, that's usually where I hang out. But to have those options available, a lot of the more rare pairs or a lot of the more kind of side ships don't have those numbers. And so when they fight, it's a big, big deal. And especially now that the show is ending, you're seeing those numbers dwindling, because the Stereks are really still kind of going strong. Like, we just did 1,000 works on AO3, and we're almost to 10,000 works of E. That's like the next milestone. And I find that in other areas, they're finding it hard to kind of find a good, positive fandom experience. But a lot of that is just going to be timing. They're just going to have to wait. Like I said, I have to take a break on Scott McCall, you know, and I was like, I'm to the point where I just need a break from Scott, where I don't deal with them. I don't deal with any of the show drama, you know, anything like that. And then I can start loving him again once all this is kind of, you know, filtered out. But I think people get impatient and, you know, they want what they want.
Do you think that Sterek has crossed that line into just becoming one of the mega ships that will exceed long past the show, like a Kirk and a Spock, an Iron Man and Tony Stark, a Batman and Superman, like that kind of, just a ship that becomes almost iconic in the annals of fandom itself.
I hope so. I would actually really appreciate and enjoy that. Sterek meant a lot to me, a lot more than I really ever expected it to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went from hating Derek to like protect Derek Hill at all costs, the thing. What I think, and I really do think that there is an edge towards that because it combines really supernatural elements in and of themselves are very few and far between when it comes to fandom. You have Supernatural, of course, and that's like, the juggernaut.
Yes.
They're going to be on air forever. Sam Dick will be 60 and
I will still be watching.
Exactly. And it's not a bad thing. I'm not hating. But I find when you're dealing with other supernatural shows, otherwise you kind of run into the superhero element, which is a slightly different thing. And they kind of have their own canon. It's very hard to jump into that if you don't have a lot of knowledge of the text. Mm-hmm. With things like Supernatural and things like Teen Wolf, you have elements that you can take from the outside world and then build them in because you're dealing kind of with an overarching like supernatural theme. And so we just did a podcast last week about WIPs, Works in Progress. Mm-hmm. And one of the girls who came on, Mojo Flowers, she's amazing. She had never seen an episode of Teen Wolf before she started writing for it. It was 100%. And then she said the only reason I really started writing, or the only reason I watched an episode was so I could get their voices. And that was a big thing especially with Derek and Tyler Hoechlin. People kind of expect him to have like the voice. Yeah. And a lot of kind of mention that he has like a lighter voice, but, not lacking in authority and, just all that kind of stuff. And so I do think we'll get more people like that who kind of come in, they're like, oh, what's this? And then kind of build it out.
I feel that people outside of fandom don't realize that that's a thing that happens, that people do often draw art or write fics or participate in fan videos for stuff that they're not actively watching, but they've been drawn to rather the community or the narrative around it before they've been drawn to the actual source material itself, which I think is really amazing. It's fascinating that can happen.
It's very interesting. But what it also does, it's one of the reasons that you can't ever talk about Sterek as like a monolith.
Yeah.
And like behaviors, because there's so many aspects to it and so many segments of what Sterek is. Like, you'll have people that come in that have never watched an episode. You have people that have poured. You have people, you could tell, we always talk about Teen Wolf as like season 1, 2, season 3, and like 3A, 3B, season 4, which everybody just kind of play. And then really season 5 through 6, and really, if we're being real, 5 through 6A, because I know people that were like, oh, 6B, no thank you. We will watch the finale maybe, and then that is it. So yeah, there's a lot of segmenting, but within each of those segments, someone new has either come on or someone new has offboarded. I read a fanfic the other week, and they kept bringing up all these characters. And I was like, oh, these must be OCs. And I was like, looking in the comments, and they're like, oh, and Moreau did something. I was like, who is Moreau? And I was like, oh, she's the, oh. Yeah, I was like, I had no clue. I'm like, oh, that's a girl from Black Sails. Total side note. Black Sails, do you watch that?
I don't. I need to, though. I've heard good things.
I pushed off watching the last season because I was like, it's going to end and it's going to be fantastic. It's going to break my heart. And it did all of the above. That's all I got to say about that.
No, I've got to catch up. Like right now, I've got to do my Riverdale catch up and all of that.
I'm letting Riverdale sit like 2 episodes behind. and then I'll watch it.
Do you ever find yourself involved in these hierarchical fandom arguments with people who don't want to get involved in the drama? Because I know there are lots of people who are like, I don't want it, I don't care, I'm not interested, I'm just here for the show slash fic, and I don't want to hear anything else. How do you feel about that kind of mentality?
I'm totally fine with that mentality as long as they stick to that mentality. I hear that from people who are like, I don't want any of the drama, and then they'll reblog drama or they'll retweet drama. And it's like, but you just said, but what they really don't want is someone to fight with them.
Mm.
And it's like, I'm actually in a fracas with someone now, and I literally told them, I was like, my intention is never to antagonize someone. So I was like, if anything I said is ever seriously upsetting you, contact me, and I'm more than happy to roll it back. I never have a problem with that. I never have a problem with apologizing and being like, you know what, I took that too far. I'm sorry, like we'll get this straightened out. I find that there's an issue going on now, especially on Tumblr. Tumblr, I'm like, for being kind of the fandom hub, they have no idea how to gear their site towards fandom.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
And so you'll have these things where people will, like, tag you and stuff and then block you.
Yeah.
And so you have, like, no way of kind of, like, responding or even being like, hey, what's going on?
Why was I blocked? Like, what happened?
Yeah, like why can't, but not only that, but if they were somewhere, especially the way that the reblogs go, if they reblogged it up here and replied to it, but you're replying to someone else's reblog, if it's in that string, you still can't reblog it. So it could be just like a GIF set of something fun, I just want to reblog this. And I'm like, why can't I? What's going on? But yeah, I know those people who are like, I don't want any of the drama. And it's like, I respect that. That's totally fine. You don't have to. I have people that have me blocked. They're like, look, sis, like the podcasts are fine, but your page gets messy. And I was like, block her, block it. It doesn't, that's totally fine. As long as they can acknowledge that there's a reason for that space. There's a reason I still get hundreds of asks per day that are just like, Teen Wolf is ruining my life. And I love the positivity, and I do love the fun kind of shippy stuff that we talk about, and gushing over Dylan and heckling and just all this other mess. But there is going to be space. I will be one of those people who provide space for people to be like,
to vent
to vent and to get it out, because those people have voices, and it's like, you have to think that there is a reason that. And I mean, not to say that, there are some people that are just crazy, and that's just what it is. And they just found a place to be crazy in. It's totally fine. I'm like, yeah, you're crazy. We're just going to delete that and get that off your chest. But for the most part, if you have that much of a majority that is just like, then there's a reason for that. And so
then clearly something has been mishandled. I like that about your page, that people can just come and vent, because I've seen people, and sometimes they're just like, I'm so mad about this, and then they leave like a huge paragraph, but you can tell that it was very cathartic. I think it's very important to have those spaces, because I find that when those spaces aren't available, or people don't know about them or how to access them, sometimes that's when it can spill over, and then you can end up with people, either attacking other fans directly or attacking creators or just other things that make everybody look bad, and I think are part of what contributes to the negative reputation that is part of what certain fandoms end up cultivating.
Well, and then also I think it's important that you have those spaces, but then also understand that our drama is fandom drama. It is ours. I'm very much like, leave your mess at home. And so we talk a lot about, a lot of times it's teasing, but sometimes, especially if one of them does something that is a little bit off. I know during Ferguson, or Ian Bowen, a good example, his tweet about, so sorry for the sexual assault stuff, but, if women need to learn how to act like ladies, and this is like years ago, and we lit him up. We're just like, but we did that in a very contained space. If you didn't want to see it, you didn't have to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Ian Bowen has no idea who we are. He has no idea about our page, but people came and they were able to kind of vent and get it out.
Mm-hmm.
And we had people that are like, I don't understand why you talk about Ian like this. He's a real person. Celebrities are people too. And da-da-da-da. And I'm like, Ian Bowen is not here. I'm like, he's are here are your fellow fandomers, and they have feelings and they want to talk about them, and they would rather talk about them anonymously here than putting it on their Twitter, putting it on their Facebook,
mm-hmm.
where you're getting all this feedback that really has to do with an emotion at a time, at a very
specific yeah
that need to keep going.
Do you think that sometimes people misunderstand the purpose of the space?
Yes, because they see it globally and not locally. One of the biggest things, oh God, there was we have several gates with this fandom, and one was like a Sterek's take out your trash gate. And it was where a BNF, which is a big name fan, which I didn't learn about till like a little bit later, but I was like, okay, y'all do a lot with the acronyms, but okay, I guess. There's a lot of backstory, but really it boils down to there was someone leaving anonymous comments that were really incendiary, and they were leaving them on Sterek Fix, and Sterek is Scott Derek.
Yeah.
And so this BNF decided that it was a Sterek that was doing it. No context at all. And she had originally come and talked to me, and she was just like, we think that if Stereks can talk to her, maybe they can kind of convince her to stop leaving these comments and that kind of thing. And so I was like, okay. Yeah. So I was doing some research, and I was like, why does she think that Stereks were involved in this at all? There's nothing that points to Sterek. And I guess she had left a comment that was like pro Styles Sterek, but I was like, this isn't a Sterek, this isn't a Sterek, this is a troll.
Yeah.
This like 100% for the reaction. Just leave them alone. And so what I didn't realize at the time is that was the beginning of an all-out campaign. And it was kind of there was a convention going on at the time, and at the end of that convention, Tyler Posey got up and had words, and and this was fresh off Bizarre, Weird, Twisted, and so a lot of Stereks had feelings. They're like, he can cry all he wants to, I don't care. He said, or they were just like, I'm not really swayed one way or the other. And then it just became online. It became this movement of long, just think pieces about why Stereks are racist, and it's pedophilia, and we're disgusting, and it's misogyny, and these different Teen Wolf spaces were like, we will no longer take Sterek requests, and we will no longer do this, and XYZ. And you have the Sterek fandom like,
what is happening?
What is happening? And it was just this weird, like, concentrated effort, and my page blew up. It was just people like, Stacey, what is happening? What's going on? Why are they saying these things? And who are they talking about? And good Stereks and bad Stereks. And it was just all this stuff. And I was like, without having that space available, because like fandom friendships broke up because of this kind of stuff, which is why I was saying that when we talk about it going too far, when it gets to the point where you value the opinions and ideas of a cast and crew that you don't even know versus the people that you interact with on a daily basis, something's wrong there. You just lose the plot.
How do you think people get to that point?
It becomes very personal. And so when you say something against the ship, then you're saying something against them because they have internalized, these people. A friend of mine, I've been watching The Exorcist, which I love. And one of my friends, she was like, this is another friend. He was like, Father Marcus, he is very important to me. And it was just, a matter of like, I know that he meant that 100%. You know, like, he is very important to me. You say something bad about Father Marcus, you're saying something bad about him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very hard to let that go. It's very hard to not get caught up, especially when you're dealing with the internet and all of it is supposed context and supposed tone.
Mm-hmm.
You have to really try to figure out what the tone is and what's happening with anything that's coming through.
And I think that's part of what makes it so difficult to let it go. Because a lot of people have the attitude of, oh, just turn it off, don't look at it, let it go. But it lingers. Even if you're not looking at it, it still stays with you because there's all of that deciphering, because it can be so much, because suddenly things can change so much in a fandom or place that was previously what you felt was a fun, safe space, and then you log on and suddenly it's, oh, you're all misogynistic, you're all racist, and you're like, what happened? I think it's a testament to Sterek that it managed to recover from that, because I've seen those campaigns happen in other fandoms and the ship doesn't always recover. Sometimes that's the end of it and it's over.
I think one good thing is, again, really having those spaces, having the privilege of those spaces. We were talking about this within, if you have 50,000 Sterek fics and Sterek works, then, you know, you have 10,000 kink memes.
Yeah.
And you have, so, you know, I need a her angst. I need a fic where Styles is a teacher and Derek is his student, but he got held back a year, so he's 18. And, you know, then there's light dom sub, but I also need the Hale family to be alive. You know, we can go right now and find a fic that hits every single one of those criteria. To have that available when people are like, oh my God, there's only 1,000 in the human furniture tag. You know, 1,000 fics of Sterek human furniture. No. But you know what I'm saying? It's available. It's there somewhere where you can go. And ultimately, I was telling my friend, I said, I am one of those people, I get very hot very quickly, but I burn off very, very, very quickly. And it's usually right when I'm about to write something long and drawn out. And then I'm like, I was like, my inbox is extremely cathartic for me. And it's like, you know, someone will write in some long, ridiculous rant, and I'm like, LOL, post. And I never go to my own page unless I'm searching for something and people have been like, Sticky, you said da-da-da-da. And I was like, where? And then they'll send me a link, and I'm like, oh, I don't know what I was thinking. You know? I don't remember that at all. But I think there are those people. I'm by no means an old head when it comes to fandom, but I've been online enough and I've dealt with a lot of people and a lot of nonsense that I know how to kind of curate the experience to keep myself in check. I had a lot of loss in the process of about 2 to 3 years. It was just, I had family members dropping like flies and just cancer. And then I had just a lot of drama. I had a situation where I literally had to pick up, move across the country, no money, no support, nothing.
Oh, wow.
It was crazy. And I went to my Stereks and I was just like, you guys, I'm in this bind, you know, and any help you could give me would be fantastic. And they showed up. It was amazing. And it was because they know 100% when it comes down to it, I'm for the fans and I'm for Sterek, you know, and I am a part of that community. And even the people that, you know, say, I've had so many people be like, I used to hate you, but then I met you. And it's like, okay, I get that. You know, people, there are always rumors and, oh, well, she said this and they do this. And then they come to my page and they're like, oh. You know, and so, you know, I usually end up turning people around. I understand those kind of things, but I value the community aspect of it so much. And I really think that is what holds Sterek together in the end. When we talk about things like Sterek Campaign, that was just people coming together and wanting to help each other. there's a Sterek zine that's coming out, and it has over like 40 new works, and they have like this alpha pack, and I'm trying not to tell too many people because I'm like, I'm gonna pre-order too, and I'm stop. But I'm gonna, start pumping that up pretty soon. But like this, part of the proceeds go to charity, and different, outside of production costs and all that stuff. But I was like,
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's so important to highlight stuff like that, because I find with fandom and discourse about fandom online, it's very easy to just fall into the darkness of it's all bad, because that tends to be what gets reblogged and shared. And when you talk about a ship as big as Sterek or John Locke or anything that's really massive and dominating, people tend to bring out these small anecdotes of these negative things. Be like, look, the fandom's crazy, they're too invested, there's too much going on. But then all these other things are happening, really nice moments that don't get as much attention. I think it's very important to highlight the community aspect of fandom, because it very much is there and it is helpful to people. And I think if people were more aware of it, it would help them understand why so many people are so attached to it, and why they're attached beyond even when a show ends or it's over. Because even though it's over, the community isn't. It's still there.
We get a lot, especially recently, there's a lot of accusation of, it's just
fetishization,
whatever. It's just them, two hot guys kissing, and that's all they care about.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly it's not. Because honestly, I mean, real talk, if we're talking about like the hottest Teen Wolf couple, especially going in, I would have been Scott Jackson 100%.
Yeah.
I thought the cutest little thing, and he had his little, shirt off and being all ridiculous. And then, of course, I love Fulton. And so I feel like if we want to be very surface, we could be very surface. The Styles element of being the kind of like nerdy everyday psychic stopped holding up well after season 2.
No, he evolves so much. He changes very much. That definition really only works for the first season. And
right, exactly, because Pride was like an updated Saved by the Bell, like a Zack and Screech. Mm-hmm. But Scott and Styles really cemented their own thing. The problem was it took the show a little bit of time to catch up with that. Mm-hmm. And they would start like dressing these really baggy things. There's one infamous scene, like during season 2, I think he was getting ready for Maze Runner or something like that. And he's taking off his shirt, but there's a locker open. And on the Eagle Eye stand, it was like, do you see this liver? You can see his back. It was like all muscular. When you're dealing, I mean, it really is a level playing ground. So you can't be like, well, Sterek is only happening because it's 2 hot guys. There were a million hot guys.
I find that's a very reductive way to explain away a ship that you don't like. And it's becoming a way I've noticed recently to explain away the dominance of male-male fics in fandom. Yeah. And I think that in itself is problematic, because it very much assumes a lot about not only who the shipper is, but what their intention is, because it very much puts them in a box that is just not accurate to the multifacetedness of fandom.
The issue is that you have a lot of female fans that are writing /fic. And I said a lot of people don't understand the inherent feminism in that. There really is a call for exploring kind of feminine ideals in the absence of a woman being there. Do you know what I mean? It kind of pushes these boundaries. We talk a lot about this in ABO fics and Alpha, Beta, Omega. And we know intrinsically that alphas are the males and omegas are the females. So how do you take someone like Styles Stilinski, put him in an omega role where you are paying respect to the feminine, but also acknowledging the masculine, Yeah. It's people do it naturally without thinking, but they don't understand. It's like what you're doing is, there's a feminism to that. There's a strength to that. There's a strength in finding your femininity and getting away from this thing of, not all girls, and we have to be, oh, she's not like the other girls, or
Mm-hmm.
other Omegas, and oh, they're all demure and sweet. But also having that demure and sweet women have just as much respect as the sassy, overly like aggressive kind of women.
Mm-hmm.
And you see those kind of things at play in fic constantly. And they get glossed over because it's like, well, we also want to see, P in the P. But it's there, and it's so heady, and so many people try to dismiss it and say, oh, they just want to fetishize it, and they just want to see two boys kissing. But I'm like, do you think about why they want to see that? What that actually means, what it actually represents, and
yeah, because I find that some people follow it even further and say that it's an example of internalized misogyny, that you hate yourself, you hate women, that's why you're not writing them, and
it's like,
no.
Like, no, it's really an expression of the differences, because when you talk about the way that women are treated in TV versus the way that gay men are treated in TV, it's a direct reply, I guess. We were talking about, Teen Wolf loves doing this, where in order for a woman to be strong and acceptable, they have to carry these masculine traits.
Yes.
And so what you see in fanfic sometimes is that men, in order to be strong, they have to shed those masculine traits and then bring on those more feminine traits. Mm-hmm. And that's what kind of kicks them into, the next level of like being dope and all that kind of stuff. But it's really a reaction to something like that. So we have Lydia, season 2, putting on her face and, doing the makeup and really kind of covering these things. But then come season 5, she's fighting and doing karate. It's like, no, this is going the opposite way of kind of what we want. Because what it does is it creates segments. And it's like, well, that doesn't apply to me because I'm not like other girls. And it's like, what does that mean anymore? Like, you're still a girl. You're still dope. You're still awesome.
I find that a lot with the depiction of women in media, that it often is one depiction that becomes acceptable. Like, there's only one acceptable female archetype, and right now, like, she's strong, independent, she don't need no man, and she kicks a lot of ass, and it can be annoying because it can turn things that aren't upgrades and try and make them upgrades. I think the thing that bothered me the most when I first really started noticing it was years before, but it really hit ahead for me in Thor, which was when they had Natalie Portman's character Jane, and she was a scientist, and that was fine. But then I read articles about it, and they said, oh, it's an upgrade, because before she'd been a nurse. And I was like, an upgrade? Right. Like, why do you have to say, like, put a hierarchy on scientist is better than nurse and ignore all of the hard work that goes into being a nurse just because it follows more feminine archetypes of being a caring profession, which is also in itself a stereotype about nursing, because nursing does not have that much to do about caring in the traditional sense. It's a lot more about applying medical techniques and administrative work. And
it's like so many nurses do so much. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it comes down to being science. They're doctors light.
Yeah.
Down to it, they have so much hands-on and practical experience, and and I'm not necessarily like equating like doctors and nurses, but rather we do get caught up in that archetype of nurses are feminine and lovely and let me hold your hand and
Yeah.
When in reality, they're running around, they're doling out medicine, and they're making schedules, and they're
and they don't take any nonsense. They don't take any nonsense.
Exactly. And then, so then again, we have Teen Wolf where like season 6, Melissa for some reason is running this hospital. And you're just like, where are the administrators? How does this happen?
No, she can do it all. She doesn't need any administrators.
So it's like she just can't be a nurse. No, now she has to run the entire hospital. It's these weird step ups, and you're just like, how about we just deal with what we're doing? Because every time you move that baseline, you're creating new expectations that aren't going to, that you may not be able to fulfill. With, you know, you're in your final season of your show, and you're bringing on a million different characters, and then trying to bring old characters back and storylines that make no sense. And I'm like, stop resetting your baseline. We kept trying to tell them, go back to basics, go back to what made you popular in the beginning. But the problem is they couldn't do that overall, so they tried to pick little things. They're like, oh, Liam and Mason are the new Scott and Styles. No, they're not. And people who love Scott and Styles are not going to think Liam and Mason are the new Scott and Styles. You're going to hate Liam and Mason. And then you have the insurgents of Theo and Liam.
Yes, that's been huge recently.
Yeah. And I wonder, I'm like, you guys have maybe a season and a half of content to go off of. But then when we think about Sterek, it's like, oh, we have that too, but we created a ton of our own kind of like content through just sets and, you know, just all that stuff. And so I wonder how that's going to fare.
I see it evolving pretty fast because I get lots of requests now for Theum, and people send me Theum fics, and they're very enthusiastic about it. And it's this new burgeoning where it's still so new and excited about existing. It's actually nice to dive into it because they're just so like, yay, we're new and we exist and it's great.
Well, it's so funny because Theum, for a lot of Stereks, Theum came out of nowhere. And one of the very first reactions to Theum from Stereks were like, I don't know about that. Because some of the more canon fans, they were like, oh, Theum's the new Sterek. And we're like, you can't have a new Sterek when Sterek
it's still going.
But as they started seeing more of like the Theum works in the way, now we're like, oh, okay, Theum's cool. You know, you can have Theum, we can all exist together. It's totally fine. And you'll see some fics that have Sterek and Theum, and it's just like old guard, new guard. It's very interesting. It's very interesting where you're like, I don't know, do I like this? Yeah, I like it, question mark. Yeah, it's like, let's see where this goes. But of course, that's just pissing off the canon fans, and they're acting up, and you know, it's a good time. It's like, okay.
Well, canon fans are always upset. Just fandom inherently often upsets canon fans.
Poor canon fans.
I know.
And you run into, so many times I'm like, I wish you would just admit that the canon is shoddy. At the very least, just admit that the canon is shoddy. And we have places where holes just need to be filled in. There's no rhyme or reason. There's no greater plan. This was just a drop ball and let it drop. But it's like, oh, no. And then you get the metas. And like, there was one, oh God, the show tried to put out some sort of thing about, oh, you're going to see a returning character or something. And I think later on in the season, someone mentioned the Berserkers. So someone found a screenshot from season 2 that had a bunch of like mythological creatures on it, and one of them was Berserker. And so they were like, oh, you see, even from season 2, they knew they were going to do a Berserker storyline. And I said, with any other show, maybe. But with this show, we know good and well.
But that's not how they work. But it's not
a writing session.
Yeah.
That they were, let's go back through some of these old episodes. Oh, hey, look, Berserker, did we do anything with that? Put it on board. Yeah, it was just like, but, it's such a weird clash.
It's interesting because I can understand, because I know a lot of canon stans because I'm in a lot of different fandoms, and some fandoms are more like that than others. And it's this weird dichotomy where they don't want to admit that the canon isn't perfect, or maybe they even feel that it isn't because that somehow makes it less than. Like, acknowledging that the fandom space is there and what purpose it's serving makes the canon less than. It's like, no, it doesn't. You can still think the canon is great, but for all these people who don't, there are all these additions and new things to explore.
Right. Well, that's what informs your fanon. That's it to 50,000 fics. And Sterek was a huge example of that, of them saying, I see these situations. We talk about Sterek as being Styles and Derek, but when you really dig into the Sterek fandom, it is really the retribution for a lot of lost characters.
Mm-hmm.
When you look into really good Boyd, understanding his backstory and how that affects his relationship with Derek and with the rest of the crew, where his stoicism comes from, where this kind of attitude that we've gleaned from the show, and then the continuation of his place in the Hale Pack or the McCall Pack or the McCall Hale Pack, that kind of thing. That is Sterek doing that. Um, Building out, even so far as I wrote a fic that built out Brayden,
Mm-hmm.
and it gave, it was a Sterek fic, but Derek had a daughter with Brayden, and then Brayden left, and it really became like a character study about her.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, you don't find that in other areas, especially from canon fics, because they're like, okay, well, the show told me XYZ,
And
so
follow
this
follow it through.
exactly. And what Fanon does is it says, all right, the show told me XYZ, but that doesn't go back to A for me.
Mm-hmm.
How do you take XYZ and get back to A? Well, let's do this and let's do this and throw this in. And it can be just a wonderful journey. I've seen so many different entry points
Yes.
for Derek and for Styles' background. Styles' mom is alive, Styles' mom is dead, just all these different things of what makes them still them and being able to kind of build on
Mm-hmm.
that.
And I think what bothers some people is, like you said, like Sterek is the entry point for a lot of this. And a lot of people, I think, get up in arms and like, well, what about Gen fiction? But Gen fics are always they're not many. There are very few fandoms where Gen fiction dominates. And so even if there is a lot of great Gen fiction, which there is, it simply doesn't match the amount of work that people are doing in the Sterek fandom and also adding, because I've seen all the tags. Like if you go to any page, you see all the tags and it's just like, Styles Derek and then like a million other tags of all the other things that are happening in the fic. So I think a lot of people, when they think of fan fiction, they think it's just a fic of, Styles and Derek and they're making out in the pool. There's so much more than
Right.
that. There are these long multi-chapter epics of works that people are doing.
So many things I've learned within mythology and lore because of Sterek Fic.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. I had no idea what a Selkie was.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the whole daemons,
Yeah. Yes.
DAES, had no idea what those were. And someone had sent me a fic, and it was like the epilogue to someone else's fic in another fandom. And she was
Mm-hmm.
like, "I love this," and it just screamed Sterek to me, so I wanted to like write in Sterek, and I was just like, okay. And then I was like, oh, and Sentinel Guide fics. I've never seen that show. Don't know what it is really.
No, I've
But
got to
God,
do a video on it. People keep asking me, they're like, what is this guide?
your next video, because that's good. I would tune in for that because I'm like, I'm reading and I'm like, okay, I get it, but the spirit animals and he can see his, but he can't see his sometimes. But I love that learning curve.
Mm-hmm.
And I love, even as a fic writer, I have wanted to do I have wanted to do a fic where Derek had a baby. And then Styles came and insinuated himself in Derek's life. It's like, we got to take care of this baby. And that's really all I had. Then something, I had another fic up, and I noticed I had a lot of commenters from Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, who's in Brazil? Shipping Sterek and Love and Teen Wolf, but evidently they have a huge fandom there. So I said, okay, I'll put this one in Brazil, and I'll
Mm-hmm.
kind of make it so that like Derek went to Brazil and had the baby, and then came back to Beacon Hills. And there's a whole thing. But like I was on Google like crazy, and I was trying to find all these landmarks, and some of them I made into wolf sanctuaries, and just all this other stuff. I had a slew of comments from Brazilians who are like,
Mm-hmm.
like, we love this. Oh my God, Brazil is represented. And I talked about like there was a popular show down there called like Galina Pintadina,
Okay.
and like a magical cartoon chicken. And she was like, I grew up on Galina Pintadina, and my sister is listening to it now. It is embedded into our brains. I cannot believe you put this in your thing. Yeah, it's just, it's so, and interaction. It's so
Mm-hmm.
fun having that kind of interaction and relating to someone. Like most of my listeners are US based, but outside of that, it's Australia, Germany,
Mm-hmm.
Brazil, and like Central and South America. And it's just like all these people around the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's such an interesting connection. I've gone traveling and have met up with Stereks and stayed with Stereks and, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is utterly amazing. And then, of course, the conventions and
Yeah.
having a legitimate place to talk about nodding.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, why does this exist? But it's so much fun. And so that's why I think when we talk about the longevity of the fandom, that's going to be where it's at, is that community.
Yeah.
And them being able to adapt and evolve kind of with the changes that happen within fandom. I think it's really.
Do you ever find yourself diving into other pairings, or are you firmly cemented in Sterek at this point?
Oh my God, it's so sad. I started as like a Skittle shipper. I was hardcore Skittles.
Mm-hmm.
And Styles and Scott.
Yeah.
And I think that was something even they made up. It was so silly. But we talk about being able to adapt. I saw a turn because I was big into Skittles and I was big into Mikhailinski or Sour Skittles, which is Scott, Derek, and Styles.
Mm-hmm.
And so I noticed a turn when things started getting really kind of anti-Sterek. There was a turn within those fics where they became kind of like hero worship fics.
Mm.
And my whole thing with Scott is that, he's a teenage boy who was kind of foisted with these powers, but he's still very much an accessible person.
Yeah, he's still relatable.
Exactly. And I found that more and more fics were starting to put him on a pedestal and then like make us like, oh, I'm not worthy to be with you and I can't believe, just all this stuff. And one thing that I loved about Sterek at that point especially was when we talk about the age difference,
Mm-hmm.
what a lot of people kind of forsake is, no one knows how old Derek is. And that's its own battle. But ultimately, you're dealing with Derek, who is the biggest case study of arrested development I've ever seen. Like, he just has a lot going on. And then you have Styles, who was kind of forced to grow up too quickly because, he suddenly found himself having to take care of his home and his dad, who was struggling, and, that kind of. And so I find that even though they may not be the same age, they do meet. They have a middle where they meet, where this arrested development is kind of meeting this expectation of like being an adult. And I love seeing the different ways that, they kind of meander and work together.
Mm-hmm.
I find that I don't like the imbalances. I don't like, I'm not a big hero worship, like, I don't deserve to have you. And I think that that's just like a personal thing. I never like that idea that you have to pedestalize someone in order to appreciate them. So after that, then I started kind of getting into Sterek fic, but I think I wrote some Stanny. I was very big on like kind of other ships.
Yeah.
Now to the point where I'm like, Styles can basically bang just about anyone he wants. As long as Sterek endgame, like pack love fics, that kind of thing where it's like just, Styles can be the fandom bicycle. I don't mind. Everyone gets a ride. I don't mind. At the end, Derek is going to be the one greasing the joints. But I'm getting so close to Sterek only. It's only a matter of time. I'm just like, I don't know. It's fun. But yeah, I'm a little more open, but I'm not as big as multi-shipper. That's actually another very interesting thing, because the girls who are Sterek only Woo! Are Sterek only to the bone. And I mean, I'm not mad at them. I was like, I completely understand, but they're like, we have been through enough. And we have never got them together on the show. When we get them together, they are staying together. Don't you mess with me. And I'm like, all right, I got you. I have some girls that I have fics where they're like, I love you, but I will never read this. And I'm like, awesome. I'm gonna stick to it. I do not mind. So yeah, it's fun.
So you're so deep in the Teen Wolf fandom, and can you see yourself A, staying that deep, or B, getting as involved in another fandom like in the future?
Teen Wolf is a two-edged sword. It is. I'm so wary. That's how it's like Riverdale. I'm like, I'm gonna give you a couple episodes, Riverdale. I don't know. Black Sails could have been that. I really do think. Black Sails, God, is so good. And they were like, we're going to do 4 seasons. We're going to tell our story and we're going to go home. And I was just like, you can't blame them, but also why? Why? That was one that I really got deep into. I know, I grew a lot in the Teen Wolf fandom, but I very, very much started as a newbie and very much internalized things and took things very much to heart when, it was said. And just, there's still situations that happen to this day where I'm like, what? Why is this happening? Why is this still a thing? What is this drama? And I'm just like, F it, I'm going to delete everything and just be done with it. But, like I said, that community, something always kind of brings me back. And I think I am one of the people who will hold out. I am one of those
like
people
ride or
that are
die.
Like, want to be like, we're going. And so, and I really do have a deep love for Sterek. And a lot of my online relationships and friendships have been because of Sterek, which is one of my best friends to date. I met her because one weekend she just decided to comment on every single one of my fics. And I asked her to be in my beta. I was like, I have a story I'm working on. Would you like to look at it? She was like, oh my God, I would love to. And she gave such great feedback. And I call her the beta to my soul. And I just recently went to Los Angeles and just to visit. And we went for the American Assassin premiere. And
Nice.
that was, oh my God, so much fun. It was crazy. But I stayed with her for a couple of days and, it was just one of those things. Like, I love having that network of people. So it becomes definitely still about the ship and we definitely still talk, sit down and talk about, what if Styles was a mermaid? That kind of thing. But ultimately that the fandom has built itself into relationships. And those are relationships that regardless of the show, I still am going to maintain and keep going. The show is just kind of like a sweet note. It's like the accessory to it.
Do you think that people who are coming into it now are going to experience some of the same things because Sterek is so big? Because for a lot of people coming into it now, I saw in the comments there was this disconnect of what is happening. I just started watching this a week ago. I have no idea what's going on. Do I want to know what's going on? So that's always a bit different when you come to something that's already complete versus coming up with it. So do you think that those people who end up coming to Sterek or some other ship will build as deep a connection with it, or just hypothetically?
I think on the majority will kind of flip in and out. They might have their other fandoms that they deal with, and Sterek is just kind of something fun. I also feel that we're in this section right now where we are. It's like our own little PTSD, where it's like the show is over. We know it's over. Everybody has kind of moved on. The writers have moved on to different shows and et cetera, et cetera. But we're still very much in that phase where it's like, is it really over? Or is it going to come back? We're still kind of on defense. We're just like, what's happening? Where are we going? And so I feel like once that kind of dissipates, then you'll kind of see more people being inclusive of the newer people. You're going to start seeing people who will start integrating the newer characters. I think you just kind of have to get over that hump of being on the defense. And that's kind of where Sterek stayed for a very long time, is being on the defense. Even with these, even with like your video, and there are a couple of other videos that came out with the Are They Gay video,
Mm-hmm.
where, people are like, oh, what's going on? And instantly you have people are like, well, Sterek suck and they're terrible. They're like, no, we don't suck, we're not terrible. There's people that literally their online experience is waiting for those to come up so that they can jump in and be like, we have to make sure that they get the right story and they get the right information. And it's like, oh, God bless them. I don't have the strength. I don't have the stamina to do it. And it's like, and it's glad that there's someone who does. But on the other hand, there shouldn't be that need,
I found it fascinating because with the ship being as dominant as it is, you wouldn't think that would be necessary. But it's occupying this very interesting space. Well, while it has this overpowering fandom presence, it doesn't necessarily have an overpoweringly positive reputation along with that presence.
Well, the problem with the reputation is that it's so based on nothing. And that's what makes it frustrating.
Do you feel that it's more based on people's individualized experiences with certain Stereks or certain trolls, or do you think maybe it's part of the fear and lack of understanding at seeing these intense reactions to things like Posygate and not knowing what is going on or why it matters?
A good example of that is Cole the Wolf. He is a huge BNF, and he had been a huge supporter of the show and of Sterek in general. He has thousands and thousands of followers. When I first joined the fandom, I immediately heard that he was the devil. He was just the devil. That's all there was to it. Point blank, do not engage with him, do not mess with him. So I was like, okay. I was like, what's this? There was something that happened where I saw his response to it. And I was like, uh-oh, there's Cole the Wolf. Oh my God, there's Cole the Wolf. And I've told him this story, and I've told this story before, so he knows what's up. But I went to his page finally, and it said something about like, oh, just trying to make it as I go into my 18th year of life or whatever. And I was like, 18? And I was like, holy God, what? Who was 18? And I said, first of all, no 18-year-old is the devil. And I was like, so first we got to figure out why they're calling him the devil. And what it really came down to, and I looked at the people who were like, well, he said this and he did this and blah, blah, blah. And it was mostly him refusing to back down. He was one of those people that he is a wealth of receipts. If you're like, oh, I'm looking for this article where Tyler Hoechlin said that Sterek wasn't going to happen. It might have been back in 2012. He's like, here's the link. MTV removed this article, but then there was another version of the article. Here are both links. He is one of those people where he takes his information, he forms his opinion, and he is very resolute in that opinion. You're not going to move him from it. And even when we talked about what the deal was with Sterek, me and him have a fundamental disagreement at one of the causes. But he's like, this is what I believe. This is what my sources told me. This is the information I have. I believe this. What ends up happening is people say, well, Cole the Wolf says it's true, so it must be true. And then there are people that are like, well, he's just a kid. He doesn't know anything, blah, blah, blah. And then they start fighting. Instead of just being like, this is his opinion that he gathered from his receipts.
Yeah.
This is opinion which I gathered from my receipts. They don't match. But we're not going to know. Get someone from the inside to actually confirm or deny. So then you just kind of deal with it. But I'm like, it's never going to be 100%. And I think that frustrates people. And when you have people who won't budge like that, then that angers people because they're like, well, nobody knows. Why do you think you know this for sure? It's like, because that's what I believe. And so with Cole, that's really been the gist of it, is like, this is what I believe. But he's never been rude about it, at least not to me. And I had him on the podcast, and I was like, look, I've heard some rumors, so, like, if we need to shut this off, you let me know. He was like, no, we're good. And then I was like, oh, you're delightful, and this is fun, and, we have a really good time together. And so,
So then do you
people
feel
get,
that the reputation is completely unwarranted, or?
no, because everybody internalizes things in their own way. And one thing that you have to realize is that when you're dealing with the internet, and I have to remind my Anons of this constantly, when I'm dealing with the internet, it's not an A to B conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It is A to B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. It is me talking to a void. And so when I see Anon come up, I'll get 6 Anons in a row.
Mm-hmm.
Unless there are specific tells in the way that they format their questions, I have no way of connecting them. And so I got smart with someone, and I was like, you're dumb. Or something like that. At least it's something very silly. And I was like, you're dumb. But then and I was like, well, you called me dumb. And I'm like, I don't know you. And what you sent to me was dumb. So I don't know what you want. But they think from their end that they're sending this asking that I know who they are,
Mm-hmm.
and that I know them specifically. And so basically what that means is that when you're dealing with kind of a general public, you have to say things in a universal kind of
Yes,
way.
100%.
That try to hit as many people equally as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that universal doesn't happen. Sometimes it's got to be very specific. And there are times where I'm like, you guys know that when I say X, Y, Z, it's not, in any other context, it would be this, but you guys know me at this point. You know what my voice is. You know what my tone is. You have to know that if I'm dismissing this, it's because I want the focus on something else. And so I find that when there are some people who do that, and then there's people like Cole who's just like, no, I'm going to speak my mind in my way. And both both methods have their advantages, and both have their disadvantages.
Yeah.
And so I think that the way someone internalizes something is extremely valid, but you have to be able to figure out how you're going to deal with that. With our latest podcast about works in progress, a big issue is commenting. And you'll have people they'll post an update, and then the commenters will be like, more now, more, please update soon. And I'm like, you have no idea how frustrating that is to a fanfic person, because it's like, of course we want to do more.
Yeah, but it's like, you got life.
Got life, exactly. But then the writers get really frustrated, and they're like, oh, they just keep harassing me. But from that reader's point of view, they're just excited. They want content. They're like, this is so awesome. I want to see more. I love it. Da, 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 da. So it's like, how do you build that bridge? Because I've been on both sides. And what I say, the best way to motivate me is tell me something in the fic that you liked. Or like, oh, I love this part when XYZ happened, because that's going to help people like, oh yeah, and it might get the brain wheels rolling, and I might be able to get to the laptop that day and write some stuff out. Without seeing that point of view, it's just attack. It
can feel that way, because it is hard to constantly be introspective and take yourself out and realize that they're not actually attacking you. Because lots of times with that internalization, it's already something you're already thinking. Like, if you're thinking you're not updating frequently enough, and then someone says more, you automatically just like, oh God, I need to update more. And you end up taking things on depending a lot on your mood. And so I think a lot of times with the internet, you need to take a step back, and breaks are good, just to understand why you're feeling the way you feel. Otherwise, it's easy to just lash out, and then it's on there forever because it's the internet.
Exactly. We had a whole thing especially within Sterek fandom, big points of contention are Malia and Brayden. They just are. It just is. And we can make, so many arguments of how their characters were flawed outside of Sterek. But then, we talked about Teen Wolf's propensity to lean into their pettiness, where it's like you have these two characters that everybody was kind of like about from the beginning. And then in season 5, they stuck them together in a pointless subplot. And they're like, oh, no, you're going to like them. We're like, no, we're not. So it's one of those things where you have writers that really like Malia for some reason. I'm petty. but no, that really like Malia, or really like Brayden. And Brayden actually came on before being paired with Derek and had like a storyline of her own that just got dropped. Mm-hmm. And so really wanting to kind of see credence paid to these women outside of the drama of this relationship. Some people are ready for that. Mm-hmm. And like I've had, I told you I just wrote this fic with Brayden in it, and I had a lot of people that were like, usually I do not touch Brayden with a 10-foot pole, but I know you are Sterek to the bone and I trust you, and and I loved it and it was fantastic. Or people will go like, too much Brayden, I can't take it. And both of those points of view are valid. But as a writer, you really have to make that decision of, how do I reconcile what I want to write? I want to write Malia as this strong, feminist character who, she don't need no man, and she's very powerful, and she's best friends, and she's a Hale. But I know, this fandom isn't going to take that, or rather not in a way that is going to be productive. Because, even to this day, there's still nonsense. So it's like, how do I acknowledge that? Mm-hmm. And I said, a year ago, I had just the mere mention of Brayden in a fic, and I put it in the notes. I'm like, okay, you guys, I know y'all don't like her, but Brayden is mentioned in this fic, and it's not a big deal, but here's where she's mentioned, so, prepare yourselves. Mm-hmm. Versus the people who are like, if I want to put Brayden in my fic, or if I want to put Malia in my fic, I'm going to do it. Mm-hmm. But then the reaction to that comes as a complete surprise, Mm-hmm. It should not have come as a surprise to you. You have to be able to read. Well, I should say, I think it's more beneficial to be able to read the room, to understand where the fandom is temperature-wise at that point.
I can understand how you wouldn't know, though, because not everybody is as involved in fandom all the time. Exactly. So it might just be someone really likes Malia, and they're really excited to write this fic, and they're not on the forums or involved in anything. So I can see it being a genuine surprise for some people if you're in your own little bubble, because for a lot of people, even though there are these great communities, they end up missing the boat or not being part of them, or they don't want to. They're a bit more lurky, a bit more introverted, and they just want to have it as a bit more of a personal thing.
And that's a big part of, so you see those, and you have two types of fandom. You have, more than two, but ultimately you have the ones that are like, okay, we'll go with this, we'll read it, it'll be fine, it'll be cool. Then you have the one of like, I was Sterek and I have been hurt before, and I will not be hurt by you. And they internalize it and immediately get defensive. So instead of it being like, oh, I just like this character and I want to write her in, it becomes they are attacking me, mm-hmm. Personally. And so it's like, how do you react? Mm-hmm. How do you react to that? I find, especially with fics, as long as they're tagged, as long as the tagging system is used, I'm mm-hmm. good. I had one fic where old girl slipped in at the end, and I just kind of left a comment. I said, oh, I really enjoyed your fic. It was very interesting. However, I noticed that it was untagged that this person showed up. I don't know if you consider adding that tag, but I know it was like a big deal for me. So yeah, mm-hmm. I don't know what kind of feedback you're getting, yada yada. Mm-hmm. And she replied to me, and she was like, oh my God, is that why everyone has been like messaging me? She was like, I have all these comments I can't post. I don't know what's going on.
Oh,
no clue. And I was like, if someone had come at her sideways, that easily could have pushed her into the camp of like hating all things Sterek's and all. Mm-hmm. But she just didn't realize like, oh, she just loves Shelley Hennig. She just like she had watched Secret Circle. That was one of her favorite actresses. She heard she was on Teen Wolf, and she was like, "Awesome, new character. I love her." And
Mm-hmm.
without the context, you have no clue. But it's
Mm-hmm.
so easy to just internalize those things and take them to absolute heart, where you forget that it's like you're a screen to these people. You're not you as
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of build a rapport and build a personality, but you have to build that. Not everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting thing to see. It happens quite a bit.
It is, and there's the flip side where you also have to acknowledge that if somebody doesn't take your comment well or doesn't take the advice, that's fine too. It's just, all of it,
It's
water off a duck's back.
Well, it has to become that way. You have to. You just have to find that place, if just for your own kind of peace of mind and your own health.
Mm-hmm.
I had a fic that I wrote, and I think like at the end of the fic, I think I said something like, "I hope you both get malaria and die," or something. It was something that like Styles said to someone. It was very silly, and someone commented, and they're like, "I love this whole fic up until this point. How dare you use malaria, and all these people die from malaria daily." And I was just like, "Whoa." Like I had no clue. So
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Oh, it's fine. I'll change it." And then I changed it to like diabetes or something, just something like really innocuous and
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous. And she wrote back and she was like, "Oh," she was like, "I didn't expect you to actually respond
Mm-hmm.
and then be willing to kind of make that change." But it's like, if I had just taken that normally, I'd be like, "Oh, that's you, and my next fic is going to be all about malaria." Thing. And so it's like you really, just for your own peace of mind. Especially in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
I had readers I know I pissed off. I know I pissed them off, because I was just naive and young, and I was like, "Ugh, I don't like this." And I'm like, what? Think that was okay? Like, why did I think that was a good thing to do? But you get to that thing where you're just like, they definitely want to hear my opinion on the matter. Like, let me give you some concrete, and it's like, no one's asking for that. They're asking for interaction. And I think
Mm-hmm.
once you understand that it is a back and forth, and that it is
Yes.
building a
Mm-hmm.
community, you lose a lot of those kind of dramatic tendencies. It stops becoming us versus them and just becomes about
Mm-hmm.
us. I said, I want that fandom where I have fun meta arguments,
Yeah, where you can disagree and it's not cataclysmic and world ending and you have to leave the fandom. I actually, because I always try to respond to people with kindness or how I would want to be approached. Because actually, when I first posted that video, you sent me that anon on my Twitter, and I actually recognized her. I was like, "Oh, she commented. I know who that is." It defeated the anonymousness. I know who that is. And so I went, and she had actually left a comment. And at first, it was kind of angry. It was, like, I feel like you're trying to ignore how fans feel and placate us and all this stuff. And I just responded with, "No, that's not what I was trying to do. And if you want more, like, please just let me know." And then she responded. She was like, "Oh, I didn't expect you to to
right.
reply to me and be nice." And
Especially with Stereks and with fandom in general, the concept of being heard
mm-hmm.
is a very big thing. And especially when you're dealing with Teen Wolf, especially, you run into this strange dichotomy where you have the MTV viewers, that we'll call them, where it's like the fangirls and boys who just love to see, cute boys and, oh my God, Dylan O'Brien and da 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 da. Then you have the ones that really understand the metaphors and the allegories and say, I was a person that was kind of segmented, and in own ways, I've dealt with micro antagonisms, and I've dealt with microaggressions, and I've dealt with this, and now I'm seeing another character that kind of has to deal with that same thing. Styles having ADHD was a big deal. Scott having an inhaler and then not needing to use that inhaler after he got his powers
Mm-hmm.
was a big deal for a lot of people. They internalized that. Something that had always been seen as a weakness for them was suddenly being kind of praised, and like, "Oh, I'm awesome," not even despite, but with
With
this
mm-hmm.
kind of disability. And so you deal with a lot of people who felt like their voices weren't being heard. And especially the Sterek fandom, where a lot of them had a direct line to the makers and to the creative staff and to the powers that be, and still felt like they weren't being heard because it wasn't translating onto the screen.
Exactly. Which in a
Being
way
acknowledged.
makes it more hurtful because there's more of an expectation of it because you are in communication. It's not like those situations where you're shouting into the void and they're never replying to you and you're never hearing anything. So at least you can rationalize, well, I guess they're just not paying attention to any of us. But when you're engaging in this and the promises are being made and then they're not materializing, it
Right.
very much feels like you're being used, like your fandom and what you appreciate about the show is just being used to garner more viewership and to make sure that you stay, and they're going to give you just enough to make sure that you stay invested but not actually go the whole way.
And that, especially in this last season, bringing Styles and Derek back, it was rough. When we
Uh-huh.
first heard that they were on set, it was probably a few months before the episode actually was due to air. And then they released a promo, and Sterek fandom just went crazy. Because on one hand, it's like, yay, more Styles and Derek and new stuff that we can do what we want with
Mm-hmm.
it. And then on the other hand, it was like, no, you have begged me enough. I do not trust y'all, blah, blah, blah. But each were valid,
I
you
saw
know,
some people who genuinely thought it was going to happen, and that's why they were there. And their disappointment was so real when.
for real. And then, so then you have the ones that were like, told you, you know, and then you have the ones that are like, help me. And yeah, that was, but again, it's just, it builds up. When we talk about the fanaticism of Sterek and we
Mm-hmm.
talk about kind of the overwhelmingness of it, it's all born from the seedling that was planted and then just never pruned. It just grew all over the place and vines all over the house, and and Stereks are just like, oh, and so that's why, like, the show ending was a huge exhale, because a lot of people were like, well, we weren't with the show to begin with, but we were still, there's still people that still clung
Clunk.
to the show and really still loved the other elements of it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, when I was talking about Styles and Derek are Styles and Derek and Sterek, but it's also Steeder and Steedifer and it's Coach and it's the Argent family and it's
Mm-hmm.
the other members of the Hale family who didn't have a name, and it's just building out this world that you come to love so much, despite the fact that you also feel like it let you down.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very emotional.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Good times.
We've been talking for about 2 hours.
I know. I was like, oh, she's gonna cut this down. You're gonna have to send me the raw of it, and then we'll just do some
Yeah, see
outtakes
all
of raw.
all of it.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. I've had a lot of fun. I could talk about Sterek forever.
No, I
I
I
mean,
like every one of these ends with me being like, "Can you believe we've been talking?" It ends with, "Can you believe we've been talking for this long?" Or, "Oh, look, my baby's back."
exactly. It's just I love Sterek has done a lot for me, and just personally. So I understand the need, and I understand kind of that voice needing to be heard. Ultimately, I feel like the next section is really going to be the growth
Mm-hmm.
and kind of moving past that, kind of moving past the bitterness element of it. And that's a tough mountain to kind of get over. But I feel like it needs to happen for, start to really kind of push forward. We're going to have to start letting go of like Posey hate and,
Do you think
and
people ever will, or do you think it'll be kind of like Firefly, forever bitter, only one season?
well, see, Firefly, even then, people were, forever bitter, but they love
Yeah.
Firefly. I feel like people are forever bitter, but they don't love Tina. Or rather, they loved the potential of it. And I think it's going to have to get to a point where we just have to let go of the extra, the kind of inner fandom sniping
Mm.
that's happening now, and really just kind of be confident in our ship and in ourselves, so that it doesn't, I guess, just hamper us. It doesn't kind of leave us like in this sad, bitter state, but where we're actually growing and creating, ultimately knowing that this is going to be for us. Right now, we have the reins. We can make this exactly what we want it to be. And I feel like we're at a point where we're setting those parameters and saying, okay, this is what we're going to be known as, and this is how we're going to flourish. And,
Hmm.
hate, don't hate, and they can do and say whatever they want, but we know within Stereks that we're dope, and we
I
got
think we can
it.
get
And so,
there.
yeah.
If Zutara can get there, Sterek can get there.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. Yes. Exactly. Well, again, thank you so much. You have no idea. If you need anything else, any names, links, yada yada, let me know, and I'll be more than happy to help.
No,
Whatever's
thanks
gonna
so
help.
much. No, I'm so glad
Awesome.
we got put in touch. This was great.
I I know. It's exciting. Don't be a
I
stranger.
won't. If you made it to the end, you guys are troopers, and thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to check out all of Stacy's links down below, and let me know what you think of Sterek. Or let me know what ship you're this big a fan of, if any. Do you have that one big ship, or do you flit from ship to ship like a Fandom butterfly? Let me know down below. And if you're enjoying these videos, please let me know that too. This has been Shipper's Guide to the Galaxy, and let's get to that outro. This has been Shipper's Guide to the Galaxy. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Special thanks to all my patrons, names on the sides. Follow me on social media to stay up to date, and as always, stay tuned, for there are as many ships out there as there are stars in the sky.